Welcome to Staying Connected, a podcast where I talk to other people about their stories with VEDS or Vascular Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Staying Connected. This is your host, Katie, and before we get into the show, I want to remind you that the views, information, and opinions in these podcasts are those of the individuals involved and do not represent the opinions of the Marfan Foundation. The Marfan Foundation is not responsible for and does not verify for accuracy any of the information contained in them, nor does the information constitute medical or other professional advice or services. This show is not produced by or affiliated with the Marfan Foundation or the VEDS movement. In our last episode, we heard from Grace Earbar, who was diagnosed with VEDS when she was 12 years old after a bowel perforation. In today's episode, we'll hear from Dominick Corso, who was diagnosed with VEDS after a sudden medical emergency that identified 3 aneurysms he didn't know he had. He shares details about that medical emergency, and he'll also talk about how he is dealing with a VEDS diagnosis in his 40s. Before we go over to the interview, if you like this show and want to support it, consider joining my Patreon. For just a few dollars a month, you can make sure this show continues to reach people around the world with real-life stories about VEDS. You can join the Patreon at patreon.com/translucent1, and you can also support the show by sharing this podcast with people you know to help us raise awareness of VEDS around the world. Thank you so much for your support. Let's go ahead and go to the interview with Dominick. Hey, Dominick, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today to share your story with VEDS. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody who's listening?
Yep, I'm Dominick Corso. I'm a 46-year-old. I am in the Pacific Northwest, and I've had this VEDS diagnosis for just a little over 2 years. So it was February 6th, 2020, when I had found out kind of the answers to some of my questions, and the answers was VEDS. So
how did that... First off, that must have been very strange to get that at the beginning, like right before this pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
But how did that come about? Like, what led to this?
And it all started back in 2019. And I should actually say it. I had an emergency surgery in November of 2019, where they had to surgically repair 3 aneurysms that they had found in my body. Unbeknownst to me, I was just a normal guy living my life, and I had an incident that day. But I got to step back a little bit earlier before that, because in March of 2019, I'd actually started to feel somewhat of a lump, kind of in my groin area on the hip, and it felt like half a tennis ball. The firmness of it, like half a tennis ball, was about that size. Very strange. And naturally, I asked my wife, I'm like, what do you think? She's like, you should have a doctor look at that. Yeah. So I did in March, and then they had said, based on what we know about you, you're a healthy, 40-ish kind of guy. It's probably a hernia. As the pain presents itself, go ahead and get an ultrasound. We can look at it and see what's going on. I again visited the doctor in October with similar pain, and I had not had that ultrasound yet. And they kind of said the same thing. They're like, hey, when the pain presents, go ahead and get that ultrasound. And I ran out of time. So in November of 2019, and I'll tell this story the way I like to tell it, because it was just a great normal day. We were actually at a soccer game. It was a championship game for my daughter. And I was kind of helping out. And they smashed it, by the way. They crushed it, and they won. Good. And we were celebrating that night. We went out to dinner, and we're just chilling with everybody. And later that night, when I got home, I started to talk to my wife, and I said, I'm starting to feel this gut pain, and it feels similar to the time I had kidney stones. I'll come back to that. And I said, I think something's going on. And that was about 9:00 at night. By 10:00, I was inconsolable. It was very strange. The behavior that I was exhibiting was just completely not like me. I'd actually was kind of upstairs. I was in our bedroom, and I'd actually flipped over a couch, and I was like pressing on the couch on that spot that was hurting. I really had no idea what I was doing, but it was the largest of the 3 aneurysms. I was probably putting myself in quite a bit of peril, pressing on it and trying to massage it and really alleviate some of that pain. But, by 10 o'clock, I was like, I can't take it anymore. It literally floored me. And, we got in the car and we started to go to the hospital, to the emergency room. And my behavior was just so erratic. We're about 10 miles from the hospital. It's only it's a 20-minute, less than a 20-minute drive. And as we're driving down the freeway, I'm literally begging my wife. I'm like, you have to pull over. I need to get out of the car. I have to move. There was just this sensation of I could not hold still. I'd never felt anything like this in my life. And so she insisted that we wait for an off ramp. And I literally had to get out of the car and do like touching my toes and just like moving all around to alleviate some of that pressure. So I'm in this state of kind of pain and shock, not really understanding what's going on. I'd actually been like climbing over the car already. It was incredibly strange. Next thing you know, we walk into the ER, and they pretty quickly, this is in 2019, so the volume at the hospital was pretty acceptable, and I was able to get in rather quickly. They then basically put me in a room just for observation and evaluation. As many people here with VEDS, this type of dissections and aneurysms don't present in a guy like me usually. It's a rare disorder. So they put me in a room, and I was in there for about an hour. My erratic behavior continued. My wife tells me, she's like, you were crawling on the floor. You're like pushing on the walls. These are all bad things to do when you have an aneurysm presenting itself. Really bad. In retrospect, we look back at it and we're like, it's amazing that I was able to get to that point. And then after about an hour, they finally decided to go through the CT imaging process. And I remember this distinctly because that lack of movement was really hurting me. And I told them, I said, I can't lay down. Please don't make me lay down. It just hurts to sit still. And they said, well, you're going to have to lay down for about 2 minutes. And they put me through the CT scanner and they pulled me out. And I was like, I have to stand up. They let me stand up. I did my, touching my toes up and down. And then they said, hey, we need to do it again with the contrast. So as you know, that looks for more of the vascular system. And that is at that point where the world changed. They pulled me out of the CT scanner and I went to sit up and they immediately said, no, you don't get to move anymore. And I'm like, I have to get up. They're like, you don't move now. And 4 people came in, they lifted me on the sheet, put me onto a gurney, and they're like, you need to just not move. I'm not really knowing what's going on. Obviously they had found something on that CT, thank God. And the next thing you know, I'm being wheeled into more of a permanent room that has some of the facilities to take care of somebody who's in danger. And it was at that point they told us that, hey, we've identified these 3 aneurysms. And so I can tell you about those aneurysms. I have to say, I am kind of bragging about the size of my aneurysms. So forgive me. I take great pride in this just because it was so apparent to me. I did nothing about it. But I had 3 aneurysms, and I had one, the AAA, the abdominal aortic aneurysm, kind of in the center of my stomach. And then my 2 common iliacs on the right and left, both were presenting with the aneurysms as well.
So that tennis ball was one of your iliac arteries?
Yep, it was the right common iliac artery. And that was the big one. So I had one that was 3.5 centimeters, one that was 5.5 centimeters. And then on the one on the right was just short of 8 centimeters. And my understanding is that when you hit 5, you're talking surgery. So I was overdue for one guy and the other guy to be taken care of. And so that's when they started to present to us the options, which were very limited. And they said, we need to get you out of here. You can't stay at this hospital. And they said, we're going to send you downtown and be at a better place where they have the vascular surgeon available and a better team. And I remember them, at that point, saying like, no, we're going lights and sirens. And that this way they're starting to sedate me with some of the pain medication, which was very helpful. But I'm starting to gain some fogginess here at this point. And I also gained big sense of humor. I have a lot of jokes through this because the Dilaudid apparently increases my sense of humor. So I remember the last thing I really remember before being transferred is sitting in the ambulance, like talking jokes with these guys. And they're just like, no. Next thing, I don't remember any of the ride. But the next thing I, really remember is being in the hospital and at the next hospital, and the doctor really going through, here's what the situation is. And he went through all the risks of the procedure. He's like, I need your consent. And the way that my wife tells the story is, she said, like, is he even in a state where he can consent? And I was just like, I don't care. Just please make the pain go away. Just the pain. I need you to take care of the pain. Do whatever you need to do. And that was so I had gone in to start the evening around 10 o'clock is when I hit the first ER. At this point, I'd been transferred right around midnight. And that's when we had to start making some calls. It's very frightening at that moment to be like, wait a second, I just had a soccer game this afternoon, and now I'm being told that this might be it, that we don't know how the surgery is going to go, and everything's at risk.
Yeah, and at that point, they didn't know you had VEDS yet.
That's correct. This is all
brand new information.
Yeah, very confusing. And in retrospect, I think the stress of kind of hearing like where you're at, nothing made sense, and that's, I think, where one overwhelming emotion I think a lot of VEDS patients have really started, which is, what did I do to deserve this? What did I do wrong? And that's a really difficult emotion to make decisions with. And you start to self-blame. I had no idea that I was born with this. But I do remember at that point, I called my sister and I kind of told her, how do you actually convey that to somebody? But I just told her, I said, I don't know what's going on. This is the situation. And, I realized that at the moment, like, this might be the last time I talk to my sister. And she just said, I got it. I'll take care of it. So she went and helped tend to the kids. She helped inform my parents. And, at this point, there's a lot of fuzziness in my recollection of this story. And to be honest, the reason why I've not really gone back and reviewed all of this, it's really difficult today. In retrospect, there's I don't know if I can label it PTSD, but there's a lot of stress and a lot of emotion that it conjures up when I look back. I actually just found out this morning. I was talking to my wife about it. I was like, this is how it happened, right? And she said, no, at midnight, we got the kids, we got your parents, and we came and we were with you about 1 o'clock in the morning. And I have no recollection of this. And, I have 3 young kids. They're oblivious to what's going on. My parents have no idea why this would be happening. And I was just out of it. And they prayed over me a little bit. And the doctors had at this point actually stabilized me and said, he's not in any danger right now. We do need to operate. And they said, we'll wait till the morning, till about 9, 10 o'clock. And at about 11 o'clock, they started the procedure. And it took from what I understand, it took about 5 hours for them to go in and do the repair on those 3 aneurysms.
So they did both iliacs and the abdominal aorta.
Exactly.
Okay.
And what they did is they had to go into each one of the aneurysms, kind of clean it out, and then they put a graft around it. And I don't think everybody's familiar with the graft, but the graft is basically I call it like surgical tubing inside my veins now. And so I like to think, and I've been confirmed this, that I'm now aneurysm proof on that graft. So that's a great sense of comfort to know that any pain in that area, again, I think I'm safe with regards to aneurysms. Unfortunately, there are other areas of me that are still at risk, but it was at that point, the doctor, so after about 5 hours of surgery, they waited a couple more hours. And so my family really hadn't gotten any contact. But the doctor came out and then presented to them about, I believe it was about 7 o'clock, maybe 6 o'clock. They said, he kind of stated like, hey, he's gone through the surgery. It was a success. He's stabilizing. And my wife, I was talking to her again, and she said that's when the doctor came out, and he looked like he'd been through a lot. When going into it, he was all, good looking guy, ready to go. Afterwards, it was definitely something that happened. There was a lot going on, and it does turn out that there was a little bit of a complication during that surgery, and they have some notes around it. They had to work through an existing dissection that they had found in the imaging. So that's where I go back to the beginning of this story, where I said it felt like the kidney stones that I had before. They weren't kidney stones. I had assumed they were kidney stones 5 years previously when I was about 39. And we had a friend in the hospital with kidney stones. And I'm like, that pain sounds like the kidney stones. It must be that. But 5 years previous, I had had a dissection. And unbeknownst to me, I didn't actually go to the hospital. I tell the story. I had a job interview the next day. And so I was like, I can't go anywhere. So I guess I toughed my way through it. But it turns out that dissection had caused some problems during that next surgery, where I had lost quite a bit of blood. So the notations on it is that I lost 5 liters of blood, which, again, my wife reminds me is about the amount of blood that is in my body of my size, and as a male, I have about 5 liters of blood. The good news is the doctors remarked on it and said, hey, the blood was pumping. He was very healthy. The heart was working. We were able to reclaim that blood and pump it right back into him. So, that's the first miracle. But I didn't know about any of that until much later. This is still stuff that I'm absorbing, trying to understand what 5 liters means to a person like myself.
Right. So at what point, like, that is a lot to go through. At what point did they start putting together that you had VEDS? Like, was that a result of that surgery?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I had an interesting experience in the hospital, just because it was somewhat of a mystery. Part of that process, when they have to go in, they go in. So I have a sternum to pubic bone scar. It's about 13 inches. Took about 38 staples. I like to brag about my staple count. But they had to go in and look around. But again, it's not something that would normally have been done for somebody like me. I didn't have the characteristics of, severely obese, smoking history. These were not things that happened. So it was that next morning when I woke up. I remember that first breath. I like to talk about it because it's like a breath of life where you wake up and it was an awakening. I looked around and it was literally kind of like, where the hell am I kind of moment. And they had come in and they kind of told me that, I'd survived, obviously. And, they said things were healthy and I was being stabilized. But it was only until really I started to have issues with some of the management of my blood pressure. I was on every kind of blood pressure medication that you can offer me. They're actually putting things on that are really cool sounding, but nitro patches. So they would put a patch to absorb the medication through my skin. Those are not fun, by the way. They give you extremely bad headaches. But they were doing everything they could to kind of slow down my system and make sure that blood pressure was safe, because I had this aortic repair and plus the stitching, and I needed to protect that. The way that surgery starts, though, is that they basically take everything inside you and move it to the side, and then they do your work. Well, that resulted with me, it resulted in what's called an ileus, where your stomach pretty much just shuts down. So you stop, your body just stops working. So I was in the hospital for about 9 days. And I think I had, during that time, I had a tofu smoothie and I think some quinoa, which I don't recommend. But they had essentially not been able to regulate the blood pressure. What was really amazing, and I remember the emotion at the time, I'm like, the brain power in this room that's just trying to troubleshoot me is incredible. I had like 6 doctors, mostly, there's the hospitalists and surgeons, all just kind of throwing ideas back and forth of what this could be. And based on that conversation, kind of myself really not being where they, thought I should be, they said, there might be some connective tissue disorder, which, essentially is VEDS. But I had no idea what this meant. I had no idea what this meant for the future. And it was at this point, though, that, I was feeling very good. I was happy to be alive. To be honest, when I did wake up and people started to come visit, I felt a bit of guilt at the same time. I didn't know what I did to deserve it, to make this happen. And I certainly felt at that time like I didn't deserve the attention that I got, that life-saving attention. And that's kind of a common theme that has been something that I've had to work on for the last over 2 years, is really kind of accepting the fact that I do deserve that. I didn't do anything. This is something I was born with, and regardless, I did deserve that attention.
Absolutely. So like how did you work through those emotions, and like how do you work through those emotions? Because those don't magically go away, right?
No, not at all. That's really where I'll get to the community in a moment. But for me at that time, this is still November. We're still trying to figure out, how can we figure this out. So I did go see a geneticist, and he said, this sounds like we should test for this type of, what can cause these type of aneurysms. And VEDS was on that spectrum, but I had a pretty broad genetic test that they ordered. That was in December. And then in February 6th of 2020, they called me back in. And I remember driving there, and I mean, what could go wrong? I could never imagine VEDS. There's never in my wildest imaginations that I thought of even something like this. And my wife said, it's interesting that they've called you back in. And so I was preparing for something. And then the doctor gives me the diagnosis of you have vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I'm like, well, what does this mean? And this is where there's starts to be a pretty much of a gap of there's some loneliness for about the next 2 months where I was on my own. This is one of the things that, I love the community for closing this gap with other people nowadays. But I for the next 2 months, pretty much thought I was going to be dying very soon. At the time, when you looked up VEDS, you go to search for it. It gave back really two primary results that I saw, which was it was defined as vascular Ehlers-Danlos was the disorder where a sneeze can kill you. And they're talking about that pressure that you put on your vascular system. So that's pretty scary. And then they also said that the average life expectancy is about 48 years old at the time. And I can't tell you how overwhelming that is. I was at home at this point, still recovering. And you learn a new way to cry at that point. There's something overwhelming about being 44 and thinking that you have 4 years to live. There's so much of your life that is completely just erased. And you have to, I didn't know how to redefine that. I was lost for quite some time. But in that meantime, I had the support from my family. They were wonderful, doing everything they could. But one of my daughters actually said, "Hey, you should get on Instagram. There's a lot of Ehlers-Danlos stuff." So I started to get on. I started to look at Instagram, find some people, which somehow led me to the support calls that were happening at the time. It was in April of 2020 that I joined my first call, and I can't tell you the great emotions that I had. Where I was lost, I finally found some answers. And I like to mention that on that first call, a friend of mine who was also on the call for the first time, Dan, who you've spoken to before, had started talking. And as he's going through his story, I'm like, this is me. This is exactly what I'm dealing with. Like, how can this be so perfect? And I actually called him afterwards. I said, "Hey, I think we're twins." And I love Dan. But that immediately was this great relief of not being alone, really trying to search for hope and have better contacts with the right people to help take care of myself. And from that, I make light of some of these things, and I hope not to offend anybody who can't take this so lightly, but I kind of have to for my own sense is how I cope with it. But those calls started with me just showing up and sharing a little bit about what had happened to me. And it's extremely cathartic, extremely helpful to do so. But it was also an opportunity for me to listen. And I can listen in a way that other people perhaps can't. When you have this disorder, there's just something about having it. And I think that was really great for me, not just to be able to share, but also to help in a little way just by being ears to other people and hear their story. And I say this jokingly, but I was almost afraid to not show up to the next call. I was like, they're going to think I died and to think that I'm gone. But I mean, I love it. I'm still addicted to these calls today. I have a wonderful community there and a wonderful support group in good times and bad. And so that community really started there. And it was about a month later where I got introduced to some of the Facebook groups, and it really expanded that network and really helped me to start to absorb what was going on with my diagnosis.
Yeah, that's incredible. That first time that you really talked to somebody else with this is just such a kind of a, I don't want to say magical moment, but it is almost like this magical moment where it's no longer just you and the information that you found on the internet at that point. It becomes you and this person and this person. And it's like, it builds this like wonderful sense of community and understanding that is hard to get anywhere else.
I don't know. I actually have talked to other friends who have other issues, not VEDS, and I wish they had the same community that we have. I don't know where they turn to for support. I know they don't have a type of VEDS group like we have, but that community within the VEDS group is so strong and it's so open. I tell people routinely that you can take as much as you need from this group. It doesn't ask, and I needed that. I absolutely needed that, and it actually manifested itself about 4 months later, where I was actually out, and this was kind of I'll call it my third incident,
Mm-hmm.
Where I had kind of a spontaneous bleed, an internal bleed, and we were out, we were out on a boat on a river, maybe bouncing around. Again, I was trying to blame myself, understand what I did wrong, and I just started to feel some really uneasiness around the flanks, and it turns out that I did have the peritoneal bleed. So inside that stomach sac, I was bleeding, and we never discovered where it was coming from. But I had 2 large hematomas. I had blood pooling on my flanks, which is not fun. It's very painful. The doctors reminded me. They said blood is not meant to be outside the veins in your body. It's like pouring bleach on your insides, and it's not going to feel good. But the real issue was that I was bleeding, and that bleeding was depleting my hemoglobin, and essentially my life was in danger. But I think, thank God, at this point I'd been enough of the VEDS community that I had learned this is not the time to react normally. And every doctor that I've dealt with, I really have nothing bad to say about them. But the interventional radiologist at the time was not familiar with VEDS. And he came in and he explained, and very pragmatically said, you have a bleed. We need to go in, we need to scope and find that bleed, and we need to plug that gap. What I had learned through the VEDS community is that procedure has actually led to the demise of many VEDS patients. That scoping, our veins just can't handle it and things start to crumble. So an immediate shock went through me at that time. And I was like, no, you can't touch me. And the interventional radiologist didn't understand, why would you be so reluctant? But in the meantime, I had actually made contact with Dr. Shalhoub, and I had her contact information, and I was able to say, and Dr. Shalhoub is a real strong advocate for VEDS patients being assertive. And I think I did a pretty good job, because I said, I'll do whatever you need to do, but I need you to consult with this vascular surgeon. And I'd like for you to do it on the speakerphone right here so that I can hear it and understand it as well. And he did. And the approach for the VEDS patients is oftentimes conservative management. And so that's what we did. We said, as long as the blood loss is acceptable and the blood levels are acceptable, then we're going to go ahead and just let you wait and see what happens. And so we did that. And luckily I was able to recover. But in the meantime, I'm on one of the Facebook groups giving play-by-play updates. And I really thought it could be the end.
Yeah.
And then I started hearing people say oh, I've had that. and it's immediate relief. And people saying like, oh, don't forget, you can get a blood transfusion. I'm like, oh, I didn't even, hadn't even thought of these things. But just the ability to be assertive and say, I mean, I'm talking to, very well-trained, very highly intelligent, educated person, and their job is to just fix this. And they know how to do it. And I'm telling them what to do. I can't imagine doing that without having first been exposed to the group and some of the assertiveness and awareness that they brought to me before that.
Absolutely. There's such power in numbers and community there. And especially like within our group, it's just so well connected. It seems like you post something on the group and then somebody like right away comes back. We have such a wonderful network too of doctors that are on our side and very strong advocates for us. And it's so helpful.
I like to actually think that, part of the group and that community really came to life in November of 2019. So I like to say that it was done for me. I'm a lucky guy. It was perfect timing. And in the last couple of years, it's grown immensely. And one of the things that I just revel in is that I had to kind of wait through this 2-month period of darkness, trying to figure out on my own what was going on. And I mean, there's no better way to put it. I was in despair. I didn't understand why I would be gone in just 4 years. And being with that group, understanding that, hey, it's okay to be assertive. These numbers things, these misstatements like, hey, a sneeze can kill you, or life expectancy is 48. I started to understand that there's actually a bigger picture there. There's actually more optimism. There's more hope. And that's something I didn't have before. There's really no hope. And that's something that I kind of attribute to Lauren, who works with Dr. Byers. She was able to consult with us over the phone initially in March of 2020. And the reason because of that is that, as you know, there was this global pandemic starting. Mm-hmm. Appointments, sessions with vascular surgeons, with geneticists, everything got stopped. And so I was again in this kind of point where I did not know how to move forward. But Lauren got on the phone with us and she talked about the community. She talked about the others that, had survived VEDS or VEDS incidents and people that were living with it. And that was the first time that I actually had this sense of hope that it was going to be okay. They also explained to me that surviving that first event really makes that 48 years of life expectancy kind of go out the window. I survived that first event, whereas many people do not. Many people don't know that they have this disorder, and it gets the best of them because they're just not prepared on how to manage it or how to handle those emergencies. I joke now that I say it's not fair because now I'm hearing of people who are being diagnosed and finding the community literally the next day. And I don't know what better, we can't get any better than that. It's wonderful. It's the best thing in the world. And just knowing how to be assertive, I think it is the best thing in the world. And I've had success and failures being assertive. When I did have that internal bleed, I walked in, I gave my script. It's something I'd heard from other people. I was in and had a CT in 30 minutes, bragged about it. I talked to you about it. There's a little nice article published somewhere about that brags about that. But I'm so proud of myself to be able to get into the right place and assert myself in a world where I usually would have acquiesced and just done whatever the doctors had wanted. But that's really from the community. I don't know how to give anybody else better credit for that.
Yeah. Now, did you get to find out what kind of mutation you have?
I did. And this is actually very interesting for me because of that pandemic and some of the doctors' availability. It's really kind of two parts because it started out with me understanding that I have a splice site mutation. So not the worst kind, not the best kind. And it wasn't until about a year later when I really was able to get in touch with Dr. Byers and visit, where he said, based on your mutation, and I am de novo, so I am the first in my family to have this. I like to say I'm the X-Man, I'm the mutant. And he said, we don't actually have anyone else who has this specific mutation. There's some others that will be able to go into the databases and find somebody else's mutation and understand more about how it presents. For me, I was just, hey, you are very unique. My mom always said I was 1 in a million. So, and he said, but we don't actually know what your body is doing. your body might actually be understanding this mutation enough to say, hey, don't create this collagen. If you create the collagen in this manner, it's going to be faulty. It's going to be what they call that mutant collagen. Mm-hmm. And so what he suggested to me is that I do get the fibroblast test. That's where they take some of your skin, they put it in a petri dish, and they see how your collagen actually grows. And one of the greatest gifts that I got in my life is they came back and said, you do have what's called that null variant, or the haploinsufficiency. And so in my understanding of it, I'll just explain it real quick. It's that whereas those that do not have the null variant, they will have their collagen mixed with that defective collagen, and it's more likely to tear and break. Whereas I have, with the null variant, about half as much collagen as the normal average non-VEDS person. So what I was told was, you do have later life onset, which makes sense. I didn't really have an incident until I was about 39 or 44, in that range. And you're spared from a lot of the GI issues, which was very comforting to me, because I have a lot of pain still from the surgery. It's probably more nerve damage, or just a lot of work was done in there and a lot of pushing body parts around. Mm-hmm. But I was alleviated from that fear of some of the GI issues, or perhaps like the bowel perforations. And they said you have a longer life expectancy. We're not exactly sure what that is, as I've been told, because those diagnosed with null are continuing to live past the mean age, and so they can't actually define that mean age, which really hopeful. And hearing people on the board, on the message boards in the community say, they have these type of mutations. I'm sorry, this type of mutations. And they're able to say, like, no, I survived. Here's how old I am. And I'd always seek out people that are older than me and say, like, okay, I can get there. I can get there. I can get there. And mm-hmm. the number continues to go up and up and up.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And so the first piece of information that you got was actually not accurate then. So when you got in to see Dr. Byers, you were able to get a more accurate assessment.
Exactly.
Of what your picture looked like.
Yeah, it's something that I don't know how to actually promote that more with other people, but I believe, and I think that Dr. Byers agrees, that there is somewhat of an underdiagnosis of those with null. And my only advice there is to talk to a geneticist who is familiar with VEDS, and make sure that they can evaluate if your type of initial mutation, if that can be evaluated through the skin test. It's how I found my null variant. Just very important for how I live my life and the limits that I can put on myself.
Yeah. Now, did your kids get tested for VEDS?
Yeah, I have 3 kids with the autosomal dominant type of disorder that we have. That means you have about a 50-50 chance of spreading this to your children. And I'm not the luckiest guy in the world. So we're not completely spared. However, I try and steer away from this topic for the most part. My kids are young, and the way that they choose to adopt and move forward, or hide or share, I really need to leave up to them. So I tend not to go too deep into that avenue. But yeah, that was a different day too. When getting those results back was a game changer. Whereas before I was gonna have my heart set on being the guy that was gonna somehow run a marathon, and you'd be making bracelets with my name on it. It turned into more, hey, I have other people to take care of, change the world. So, but at the same time, so I like to keep that a bit at arm's distance in these open conversations. But that's a game changer.
Yeah. And I totally respect keeping that private, Mm-hmm. How did you deal with that emotion? Like you said, it was a game changer. Like how is your day-to-day now as a parent with VEDS who also has VEDS in the family?
Well, I've learned to start to be selfish. It's okay. We have to self-advocate. We have to take care of ourselves first. And use the analogy before, it's like when you're on the airplane and the oxygen mask comes down, they're like, you got to put your mask on first so that you can take care of other people next. And so I put a lens over what I do that says, is this safe? Is this within the realm of what I should be doing or can be doing? And with kids, it's a little bit different, because you take that same extreme and you apply it towards them, and they're living their life. They can't be as restrained as I can, and I want them thinking about it all the time. But I do think about it all the time. It's top of mind always in that lens of what should we do or what should we not be doing, that I have myself, is amplified through kids. So it's a game changer. It's a completely different ball game. But at the same time, we know, just like I was able to survive my first event. Again, I believe it's a miracle. We know now we're able to be proactive. So I get annual scans myself. We're able to be proactive and try and identify an aneurysm. And I do have an existing aneurysm still. It's not growing. They're looking at things like my aortic root for dilation, which is a problem, and that's holding well. But knowing that we have it allows us to be in so much greater control in a world with a disorder where there's really little that we can do. I was told to, not lift more than 20 pounds. I was told to avoid things like sprinting. A lot of restrictions, a lot of maybe overprotection, and learning then that I had the null variant kind of allowed me to back off a bit. But it also, allowed me, as I apply that lens towards the family, able to back off a little bit and not be scared. And that's in my head. A lot of this about VEDS, people talk about, it feels like you have a target on your back. You never know. The nature of the disorder is so sudden. You don't know when it's going to manifest itself. And so knowing all of this really helped alleviate a lot of that pressure. And this is 2 years past my diagnosis, so it's taken a long time. And I think I mentioned to you before I didn't want to have this interaction, this call with you, until I could do two things. One, be in person, which the pandemic perhaps is not going to allow that, but another day. But the second part is, I wanted to tell people, and this was a year ago, I wanted to tell people I feel broken. I still feel like I have not figured this out. Every day is, not every day, but there's new challenges presented constantly. New, who knows what's going to happen is going to be presented constantly. And I wanted to tell you, I want to tell everybody, I still feel broken, but it's been a year later since that. And it's 2 years past that diagnosis. I feel a lot less broken. I feel like there's a lot more manageable and a lot more hope. In a much better place. But it definitely wouldn't be that case if I don't think I'd met the community. Again, the community is where I was encouraged to really kind of identify with a group that knew where I was coming from, could help me through those worries. But they also really promoted mental health awareness, which is something that I was oblivious to before. I don't think I ever really appreciated it. But one of the psychologists on the call said, call me anytime. And so I called her and was like, all right, how is sitting on a couch telling you about my parents going to really help with this? And she's like, you got it all wrong. It's not really about that. It's about trying to really understand your emotions and really understand what you can and cannot do and what's right to be in your head and how you can evaluate things in I think it's not just more intelligent way, but really a kinder way to yourself. We can be really hard on ourselves when things go wrong. You hear it a lot, like you had to bleed. What did you do to make that happen? Or, you should stop smoking. I'm not a smoker.
Right.
So, but to really have that help with mental health has been just so dramatic for me in my life.
That's wonderful. Is that what you would recommend to somebody else listening that just got this diagnosis?
I'd like to say yes. I know that VEDS is so unique to each person. I think you need to take a little bit from each person and really find what works for you. But there are no rules here. You get your own set of rules. That's part of the game. This is such a rare and unique thing that you should learn from what works. However, I will say you need to find your strategy. My strategy is heavily based in the community and my faith. And I've somewhat redefined my God. There's a religion, which is my community that supports me. And then I have my God that I understand. And I can speak to. And it's really kind of speaking to myself and understanding what I need. But for me, I needed the mental health awareness and that help through the therapist to really get to that point. I really didn't understand. And it goes back to what I was saying before about what did I do to deserve this? How, I still revel at the amount of energy that it took to save me. And I don't think that I'd been living life the way that I wanted to. VEDS changed my life. I was able to refocus and start to understand that it's not the end of the world. That day will come. But in the meantime, I like to use the analogy of, they talk about your cup runneth over, and that can be with good or bad. When I got the VEDS diagnosis, something that a mindset that I've developed is that I still have that cup. It's just gotten a little bit smaller. Life's not going to have as many experiences or as many years perhaps. And so I'm going to make sure that whatever goes in that cup is what I want. And I don't have time for for the BS. I don't have a lot of time for the people that don't understand. And so that mental health awareness, I think, has really empowered me to keep things at an arm distance that don't support me and really seek out and welcome those that do.
Oh, that's really wonderful, Dominick, and I really appreciate you sharing your story, for sure. If there's anybody out there listening to this who is struggling with their mental health, or you're just diagnosed with this, there is a very supportive community out here. If that speaks to you, to reach out, absolutely don't hesitate to do so. This is, like Dominick said, a super supportive community, and we're here if you need us, It's great. So thank you so much, Dominick, for joining.
Yeah, I appreciate everybody who was able to listen to this, and I hope that you got something out of it. That's one of the things that I fear is not being able to do enough. And so I'd like to take every opportunity to try and help people or talk to people or listen to people as much as I can.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it really shows, and I appreciate it so much.
And thank you.
Thanks everyone for listening in today, and thank you, Dominick, for sharing your story with VEDS on the show. In the next episode on May 28th, we will hear from Charlene Terrell Newman, who lost her son Luke to VEDS last year. Don't forget to subscribe to Staying Connected on your podcast player so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you like this show, I hope you will consider sharing it with your friends on social media to help us raise awareness of VEDS together. You can also support the production of this podcast by joining my Patreon at patreon.com/translucent1. Thanks so much, and I will see you soon.